Hey there, Mallory Wilsey here, Chief Producer of the Enrollify Network. And I want to take just a moment to tell you about another show on our podcast network that I think you'll love. The EduData podcast is your no-fluff guide to the data driving higher education. Forget about data silos and disconnected stacks. Timothy Davis and Jamie Boggs, two of Element 451's data analysis experts, bring you straight into the heart of the numbers that matter. With sharp commentary and rigorous research, our hosts break down complex data points and actionable insights you can use. Whether you're an administrator, educator, or just a higher ed enthusiast, EduData is your key to unlocking the data behind academia. New episodes drop every Friday morning, and you can subscribe to the show by visiting podcast.enrollify.org or just search the EduData podcast wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome to the Higher Ed Geek Podcast, where each week we explore the impact of EdTech on the student experience with engaging, fun, and relevant conversations that honor the wide range of work happening all across the higher ed ecosystem. I'm your host, Dustin Ramsdell. I've been working in and around higher ed for the past decade focused on student support and digital experiences. Join me every week for discussions with some of the best minds in education technology. The Higher Ed Geek Podcast is a part of the Enrollify Podcast Network, a robust collection of shows designed to help higher education professionals like you grow. Explore our other shows at enrollify.org or check out some of my personal favorites linked in the show notes below. Enrollify is made possible by Element 451, the leading AI-powered all-in-one student engagement platform helping institutions create meaningful, personalized, and engaging interactions with students. Learn more at element451.com. Very excited to be here with another one of our live episodes recorded at South by Southwest EDU 2024. This is on day 3, if you're keeping track, and just really looking forward to the conversation I'm about to have here with Carl Dawson from Construct Education. So we'll start out, as we always do, just if you want to introduce yourself briefly, but I know you have the story of co-founding Construct Education. So if you want to kind of go through all of your journey and then kind of what led you to co-founding and what you're doing now.
Firstly, very excited to be at South by Southwest. So Austin is our home city as Construct in the United States. As a working class boy from England, it's a very big world here in Austin. And South by Southwest Edu has really always been one of the main conferences that's been in our hearts. Great this year to see a lot of stuff around equity and sort of just looking at that kind of thing. So that kind of ties into the founding of Construct. So it was two of us. None of us came from an academic background. We actually came from industry. So I came from the nuclear industry, and my colleague Krishan, he came from the automotive industry. And we were both frustrated about the gap between education and employment. And really what we wanted to try and do was look at ways of bringing learners and people to get into industry and basically level the playing field. So you have elite universities that were preparing people to get into industry, but we felt that there was a massive gap in the marketplace from a talent point of view. Fast forward 10 years now, we're now a very large company working all the way around the world. We failed in some of the kind of the social mission that we did because we work with a lot of elite universities and a lot of big companies. But the main thing over the years really has been around looking at new ways to create social mobility, new ways to create opportunities for young people to get into industry. And then probably even more important now in a post-pandemic world, it's not just young people, it's also looking at people doing returnerships. It's people looking to change industry as well as sort of early careers going into them. So we do instructional design, we do platform build, we do all of we were OPM before there was OPM, and we were definitely OPX before there was OPX. So we do full service suite, but really in our hearts it's about sort of leveling the playing field and looking at workforce development.
That idea of you have these sort of elite universities or, maybe bigger ones or whatever else that they are just more highly resourced. And it's kind of well, from a certain perspective, it's you kind of need to maybe start there with this kind of work because they do kind of help lead, a lot of the other institutions who maybe just aren't as prone to kind of taking a risk to be just the trailblazer or taking a new kind of innovative approach. So do you feel like that's maybe even played out in sort of just the way that you've had conversations over the 10 years of you've had these elite universities who a lot of folks kind of aspire towards or look towards to be kind of role models in higher ed? Have you seen that kind of play out?
1,000%. So the early adopters are definitely the ones that have either the biggest need or the deepest pockets. And that makes sense. But that's really, again, going back to leveling the playing field, that's created an opportunity for the rest of the world to now sort of catch up and, the cost of the build, delivery, execution, and all that side of things has really come down dramatically over the years, and with generative AI will continue to come down. But yeah, financial services for us was sort of the main industry where we had early adoption. And then from a university point of view, whilst we were trying to sort of chip away at the sort of and work with community colleges and the equivalent further education in the UK, really where we did find that there was a real requirement was amongst the universities, and the dramatic change in the market. I mean, it's just a totally different marketplace to sort of the year of the MOOC when we kind of got set up a few years ago, and looking at all of the things that people have tried to do with stackable credentials, the full OPM suite for full online programs, and everything that sits in between those. So really, everyone's been looking at what is the commercial model, what is the financial model, from the MOOC at the free end of the market right the way through to the sort of the all singing, all dancing, expensive full online MBAs, etc. And really what sits in between those. And I think that's really the gap where I'd like us and conferences like this to be focusing now, right, what's right for the learner and what's right for the institutions, and what's most importantly what's right for industry, in terms of there are critical skills that are out there in the marketplace that we cannot fill, like tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of vacancies at technician level, at graduate level, at PhD level. How can we learn from the last 10 years and say, right, look, we've tried hundreds of different models. We've tried free, we've tried $50, we've tried, $100,000. What is the models that we can do to actually meet the needs of industry right now, so that places like the United States, the UK, Australia can actually meet the skills gaps that they've got, and more importantly, we create real careers, not just I'm going to get you a job, but actually a career pathway. I mentioned at the beginning I came from a kind of very working class background. If I look at the village where I was born up in the northeast of England, that was very heavily into the mining industry. Now the mining industry had very structured approaches to sort of from the school to the graveyard of bringing people through. And you could start off as an apprentice and work your way into a degree program and work your way up to a PhD and become a chartered engineer, etc. In this world now where all of these industries are so spread out, and then with remote working, etc., how do industries stand a chance of actually creating real careers? And that's really where my focus has been.
This year's season has been so much around workforce development, and there's a lot of different approaches to that, but just what you're saying around like apprenticeships and how that can be expanded to kind of help create, like you can model it after something that already exists. And I think that can be helpful, where obviously it's going to be adapted and changed. But, like you said, we've tried a lot of these different things, and maybe for one reason or another, they just haven't had the impact. And I think it's, it kind of is like that continuum and stack. I don't know if we've even like fully realized, I guess it makes so much sense to me, like a stackable thing where it could be like maybe done more so in like a, you get a certificate or an associate to get kind of a gainfully employing job that can like then further fund future, but kind of how you're sort of progressing. I just want to make sure we kind of honor, I think you mentioned a few things in passing of like, you were sort of OPM before OPM and all that. Like, I guess just sort of like the work that you do, and maybe like who the folks that you at an institution that you work most often with. So like sort of in the higher ed context, like, and I guess right now, like what is the work that Construct Education is doing?
At the moment, what we've seen is a real shift in the OPM marketplace. If you look at some of the big players in the industry, some of them are having financial issues, others are doing very well still. There's been a lot of companies folding into each other. There's been the acquisitions. We were recently acquired by an Australian technology group, the Seek family, as part of the online education services group. So we were part of that kind of the rolling up of a lot of the industry. Our bread and butter has always, from day one, back in 2013, been around a fully unbundled set of services that means that any university, any company, any government can build out everything from scratch. So it's the instructional design through to the platform build, through to learner support, through to student services and all that side of things. So we've been involved with everything from building national platforms in countries like Israel and Saudi Arabia. We've been involved with building out training for the Cabinet Office in the United Kingdom to help support anti-kind of fake news propaganda stuff from Russia before the actual war in Ukraine. We've been involved with building out online programs at Michigan, Tennessee, Tulane, Oxford, Cambridge, etc. And really, the OPM model was always around revenue share. We were just, I don't know if it works for you as a kind of analogy, depends which generation you are, but in terms of Fraggle Rock, We weren't the Fraggles, we were definitely the dozers. So we were the people out the back doing the actual work quite often for any of these kind of major programs, and some really innovative things that have happened over the years. And some of the things that we've been involved with, it's just crazy. But basically we worked to others' blueprints to build and scaffold it, like you say, build out the programs, build out everything from the videos through to the programs, through to the platforms, through to everything else in between. And I think the biggest mistake we made over the years was really being a bit too humble about it, and we didn't really give ourselves the credit for all the experience that we had, because we were literally doing the doing. We knew every mistake that everyone had ever made. We knew whatever problem had ever been created, and we, when something the data needs to be stored in Indonesia specifically, that level of like, okay, we'll deal with it. And really we became very famous for, if anything fell into the kind of too difficult box, then that's what we would look to, which was investment kryptonite, because if you're a venture capitalist, there's nothing less sexy than doing all the most difficult work. I once pitched to an investor in New York, which is outside in Connecticut, and he's like, okay, so hit me with your sales pitch as to why I should invest in your company. It's like, well, we just translated OpenEdX into Welsh. And he's like, God bless you, that is the worst pitch I've ever heard in my life. You've translated an open source technology into a language that about 10 people speak. You're literally doing the hardest work that's out there possible from a technology point of view and from a kind of a structural point of view. But yeah, no, I'll pass on this one. Thank you very much. So, and I met him again at this conference, so it was quite funny to sort of to see where the journey had got to.
Yeah. Well, and I think, like my background initially in ed tech was working at like the 2U and the Noodles of the world, and that sort of, and I think that's where I had heard of you and kind of knew of you, and I'm just really grateful, for this opportunity to kind of talk more about the work specifically that you do. And I think that I know is kind of indicative of my experience as well, as like it's, and maybe for a lot of ed tech companies that work with institutions, honestly, but like how much do you stay behind the curtain? You're doing this work in service of the institution, and how much do you sort of make it clear, like, well, we did this, like this is us, that help empower this, digital education program or whatever else it might be. But
another investor described us as the best kept secret in London, and he wasn't saying it as a compliment, put it that way. So we managed to get into things like the Deloitte Fast 50, where we were seen as the fastest growing edtech company in the UK. That stuff helped, but we were very much behind the curtains, and that's still, I would say, both culturally, from our point of view, we're more interested in getting on with the work than sort of singing and dancing about it. So, and again, that's maybe to our discredit, as it were.
Yeah. I guess it's finding the right balance, the right spaces, or those sort of things. Because I think I would even say, sometimes it's like there's folks who are working at a campus who are just like very heads down and just very like focused on their work, and you have just other people who really are drawn to the stage and the limelight and always want to get out and be at conferences or whatever. And it's like sometimes they aren't the ones necessarily to have the best things to talk about. It's like, you over there, like you need to like really tap them on the shoulder and like get them to speak up. So I think it's just trying to find that right balance and everything. But I guess then you've been in this space for a long time with Construct, and curious just what you're seeing right now specifically around, because I feel like we kind of keep zooming in here around digital learning, the impact of digital tools, on how institutions are doing their work. Because I think like it's always kind of that weird thing where I feel like people are like, oh, the pace of change in higher ed is pretty slow, but it's like, these past like 10 plus years that you've just been in existence, I feel like a lot has been happening. And I'm just curious, sort of like at this current moment, what are sort of the things you mentioned like AI, and I think just sort of the possibilities that the potential that has for the work that you do, but just sort of what are you seeing in kind of the digital learning, digital transformation happening with the institutions that you're?
I think very specifically in the marketplace now, the two main challenges are, can you cut our costs by 20 to 40%, or can you make us 20 to 40% more money? So I think particularly at this conference, there's a lot around lots of different issues that are going on, but actually when we sit down and the brass tacks conversations are around that. So it's really looking at what solution do you have for that right now? And I think if we take a step back from that, that's actually it gives you a lot of freedom to actually think about what it is that they're doing. So I think particularly we're starting to look at much better thinking on what programs are being built. So rather than sort of vanity programs or potentially sometimes very faculty-led programs, we're now seeing a real, what is the need in the marketplace?
Hey, it's Mallory. Exciting news! I'm hosting the Engage Summit in Raleigh on June 25th and 26th, and I'd love to meet you there. Together, we'll dive into the mind of the modern student, what fires them up, how they interact, and what they expect in today's digital age, and how tools like AI help put them in the driver's seat of their education. We have some terrific speakers, including our closing keynote, New York Times bestselling author Jeff Selingo. Sessions will dig into practical ideas and innovative strategies to get your team more student centered and ready to adopt AI. And many of your favorite Enrollify hosts are presenting too, like Jamie Hunt, Jenny Lee Fowler, and Brian Gross. Use the discount code Enrollify50 for an extra $50 off your registration. Learn more and register at engage.element451.com. We can't wait to see you there.
And I think the other thing is, in terms of second mover advantage, really starting to look at already existing assets and already built content that's already been built, and then looking at the taxonomy that sits behind all of that. So, billions of learning objects have been built in the last 10 years. Assessments, videos, everything in between. Actually, how can we reuse some of those and again create better market fit, either making it industry specific with case studies from industry, making it repurposed so if we created a marketing program, can we repackage that and make it an 80-20 and suddenly it's marketing for telecoms, it's marketing for oil and gas, it's marketing for energy, etc. When I look at who's succeeding in the marketplace at the moment, they're having those kind of thoughts. One of my bugbears when talking about stackable credentials, which again kind of sort of popped up a couple of years ago, after sort of 6-7 year hiatus, I was like, we're back to here. And I would sit faculty down and say, we as the edtech industry invented stackable credentials because you had groups like us that were working at the MOOC level and you had other groups like 2U that were working at the other end of the spectrum with full online programs. And everybody was just looking to try and monetize what they'd built. And so we would we'd start adding our MOOCs together and creating tracks or micromasters or all this kind of stuff around different programs. And at their end, they were starting to look at things like boot camps and short form courses and non-accredited programs and non-degree, all this kind of stuff. In terms of that, actually now, that's where the freedom comes in. If we stop saying stackable credentials is going to solve everything or everybody can't afford a full online master's program or free courses aren't the solution to everything. If you start looking actually what is the right fit to get people jobs, so get you into a job, keep you in a job, or get your promotion, or get you a job in another company, that's really where I have seen the success. And really one of the things, I've been doing research at both Oxford and at Cambridge through fellowships I'm doing at those on the science and policy side, is really to try and drop the snootiness around kind of work-based learning. Well, we're not going to be a training college or whatever. I see exciting things that the places like MIT are doing with industry, with people like the Department of Defense, looking at things like the photonics industry. When I cash a check at Wells Fargo, there's not two separate accounts for the snooty money and the non-snooty money. It's all money. And so from my point of view, looking at the careers that people want, what is it that's going to get them in the job, keep them in the job, get them a new job, whatever, and really mapping against that. And that should have, fiber from an intellectual point of view, but that isn't less than a full program or a full degree program or the elite university kind of degree program, for example.
I guess just as like a brief follow-up clarifying question, I guess that's sort of like a manifestation of there's been a lot of states that are removing degree requirements for their jobs and everything, and be the idea of okay, great, that sort of affirms a bit that idea of if you take this collection of courses, we know what skills that gives, and you've made sort of these connections and everything. It's it should be a validation of that approach, because so much of it could have been well, cool, you took all these courses on any of these platforms that are out there, but the credential was king kind of thing. And the idea that it's great, if you have a degree, we're not saying that you can't get this job if you have a degree. It's just removing that degree requirement, and there's other ways to translate your learning, your skills, and sort of be prepared for the jobs. And some of that happens, I guess, whether it's on the employer side with their job descriptions or however they do things. It could also be the platform, the content you're building, and how you're sort of structuring that, do you feel like that's kind of like just being validated more, I guess, out in the world?
Yeah, so that change is huge. And I think the other side of it, so mentioning back in the day, I came from the nuclear industry, so for both me and Krishan, we came from a world of engineering. So everything there was around competencies. You earned your degree as a starting point to proving that you were something which was called within the industry suitably qualified and experienced person, SQEP. And that basically meant I'm allowed to change a light bulb, and until you were SQEP, you weren't allowed to change a light bulb. And then from a commercial point of view, if you weren't SQEP, you're a liability, you're being paid for, and once you were SQEP, you were an asset because you could be charged out, or you could actually get on with the work that you're doing. So you were either a trainee or you were able to sort of make money for the company. And what that looked like was, yes, there was the education side of things, but when you came in, you then were literally mapping every piece of work you ever did, and then that was assessed by mentors, by professional mentors, and was literally signed off to say, yes, I have done this piece of work. And that was really where we came from. We went for sort of very naively out into the world and thought that's the way the whole world worked. But if you start looking at the world from that point of view, so again, looking at some of the stuff that the Department of Defense has done around, putting together academies and programs whereby it's a combination of what I would call in my old kind of currency a MOOC, so short courses. So to give people a taster to get into the industry and actually understand what's going on in that industry or the technical skills that they're going to need, combined with the boot camp, combined with on-the-job training. Now, if you can bring in elite universities, which they've done in this instance, community colleges, and then on-the-job training and online platforms, that for me is the actual real sweet spot. Because if I go back to my engineering world, the on-the-job training is going to be as fundamental as the online program. The online program is just the enabler or the thing that's getting in the way of it. But to dramatically reduce the cost to bring people in through those kind of mechanisms, through the boot camps, through the MOOCs, and then tying that into the program, one of the interesting things I've seen is, in the world of innovation and AI and everything, everybody's going to be on sort of hoverboards. Actually, one of the biggest kind of innovations was when people coming very first role into industry as a technician at the lowest kind of level, and as an engineer, to put the word technologist as something that sat between those two was an actual real innovation, because it was the start of mapping. Whether I've been out of work for a couple of years and I'm coming back into industry, maybe I had a child and I'm coming back into industry, maybe it's my very first job, I can start seeing, right, here's the points in my career where I can start sort of ticking off that I'm coming through. It's smaller things like that. The generative AI, we're using that. It's reducing costs. We're creating videos. We're creating assessments using those. We're doing checks. We're doing quality control. That's a given. That's just part of the workflow process. The actual innovation is what real people are experiencing in real life, and bringing together elite universities, community colleges, short courses, long-term courses, on-the-job training. That for me is that's the real love that's happening.
Yeah. I mean that, because I think it's just like, I guess what I'm feeling and sensing from what you're saying is just like a more kind of intentionally cohesive and integrated kind of education system, and where things are sort of like symbiotically kind of playing off each other, where the idea of like, if you're on the job and you have sort of other educational opportunities, that like more magic can happen, I guess, versus it being like exclusively all in a classroom and no sort of hands-on experience, I guess. But
and I think politically it's important that this year, so we are a UK headquartered company. Most of our customers are in America. Most of our delivery is done from South Africa. Each of those countries is in election mode. The one good thing around this kind of approach is, whether you're on the left or the right, Trump or Biden or Starmer or Sunak, then it doesn't really matter. People understand that young people coming back to work, people shifting industry, they need that support, whether you're coming at it from a trade union point of view or from a cold-blooded corporate point of view. The needs are there, and that's why I think it's a really good opportunity. So if we don't agree on anything else, we know that the people need to be in those jobs, and we know that it's rapidly changing. We know that there's critical skills, and these are the kind of approaches, and it supports the universities, and it supports community colleges, and it supports industry. No one loses.
Because I think, it's like something just keeps coming up, is just like higher ed is like what's beautiful about it to me is that it's so cooperative. Like it feels like we're all on the same team kind of thing, but like that it doesn't really like realize that potential as much as I feel like it should or could. And, I think part of it is just like, let us leverage all of the sort of physical space and resources and supports and assets and things, like to try to get there. And like that idea of what you're saying of like, we've created a lot of, educational content that we've built for courses and stuff. It's like, let's just, bring kind of a network approach there where it's like, sure, it was made for this one institution originally, but we can sort of build off of that. Like you said, if it's like, okay, we're doing marketing for this or, one thing or another, and just gain kind of efficiencies there. But
I think the fundamental issue, so part of the research I've been doing, so, the kind of TLDR of all of my time doing the research, particularly at Cambridge, was what is the blocker in this system? Why isn't this happening more? And fundamentally, from my point of view, looking to, interviewing many different academics and faculty, they saw themselves as kind of research first and teaching second. Many of them were like almost like agog or shocked to be called a teacher, whereas I was just like, you're a teacher, that's what you're here for, and I kind of discounted entirely the research side of it. And then when you start looking at how they're kind of let's call it what it is, targeted against kind of the outcomes from their departments, from what they're doing, it is very research heavy. And so there wasn't a kind of a desire to shift the way that teaching was done, and there certainly wasn't, they didn't see themselves as the gateway to industry. And so many of them really thought, as soon as you start talking about vocational training, and we're talking about things like spectroscopy, it's not like sort of pat on the head, have you thought about a job? They just didn't want to become a training college. And it's like, but that's not what we're talking about here. It's like, how do we prepare for industries that, are so rapidly changing? How do you take all the great content and all the expertise, and that's not going to damage 50, 30, 40 years of your career, your tenure, your work, to actually have a focus around that. So they were just not targeted in the same way. And so that's why I think it has to be driven from industry, from government, from those side of things, to actually map against the needs. Because on a kind of we're in a societal moment of change. The United States, the UK, Australia, places like that need to make a bet on which industries they're going to go after, which ones are going to be sustainable, which ones are the strategic ones. And to do that, really, you need a hydra of industry, government, research, universities, young people, everybody working together to kind of drive that. Otherwise, we will get left behind.
As we wind down, any advice, I guess, just to try to like crystallize everything that you've kind of spoken to, which is just incredible, I think, perspectives here. Just advice that you would give to institutional leaders in higher education right now.
Yeah. I really think they fundamentally need to look at mapping against the needs of the learners rather than what they can produce. Look at their own library of things that they've created, reassess all of that side of things, and then look at so many different ways and experiment with forms of delivery to meet the needs of the learner. So start with the learner first. We did some research for the World Bank as Construct a couple of years ago, and really everything fundamentally came back to the return on education. That if we start with the return on education as the starting point for the build, before you even literally put pen to paper or touch a keyboard around building any learning object, what is the return on education for the learner? And if we start with that, then I think that's where the commercials really will get driven. And I think from a university point of view and from an institutional point of view, whether it's in the UK, Australia, or the United States, they're still so tied in to the local economies that there's so much affinity in the local states on the county level and all that kind of side of things. They have a real responsibility around that to drive the right product that's going to really mean that there is a return on education for anybody who logs into one of their courses.
I think seeing that so many institutions are like, in really financial dire straits for one reason or another, I guess sometimes it's like baffling to me. It's like, how could this institution be like $137 million deficit or whatever? Like, how does that just happen? That doesn't just like pop out of nowhere, but like, it's forcing them to make some tough choices about their programs and everything. And I think you could imagine it would have been a very different scenario if way back when they might have been thinking about like, what's the return on the education? This is a 4-year degree in, some discipline. Like, I don't know. So I think there's just like, there is some excess fat, I think, in a lot of the academic programs, the idea of just like, on that institutional level, who do we want to be? What do we do well? What's the audience we want to cater to versus feeling like we have to have like all majors for all people?
And regulators have a role in this as well, so we've been involved with government and sort of looking at what national blended learning strategies should be. And still there's a literal kind of rule book that I got sent through about the amount of library space and the amount of sports facilities that had to be had. And it's like, does a learner in this day and age see a benefit in that? Now, when I started my career as a librarian, so it's not that I'm anti-librarian, but literally if regulators is driving that there has to be X% of library space on campus, you really have to ask in this day and age, is that what learners are looking for? And for me, the value of research for society versus the value of teaching for the learners, again, is that driven by government and by the financial kind of models that are out there? So I think that government does have something to blame in here, not all to blame, but that they need to look at their role in this as well in terms of driving behaviours in the industry, which then mean that there are 20 to 30% of the institutions are below water. That is quite scary. So many universities, if they don't matriculate, will not be able to, graduate the students that come out of the student. We would have a different name for that outside of the education industry if a business wasn't able to do what it was supposed to do without getting more customers. So it's a fundamental, and I think that's a real opportunity. And I think the clarity of the 20 to 40% cut in costs or 20 to 40% raise in revenues should really drive some behaviours right now, and everybody has a responsibility in that.
I feel like you had some great already, like final thoughts, call to action, everything, but anything else that you want to sort of add in here that maybe we didn't get to, or just whatever you want to do to kind of wrap up the episode, the floor is yours.
I'm very grateful for the last 10 years. We have worked with institutions across the world. I would say faculty has always been our main stakeholder. Again, investment kryptonite, because our customer was the person doing the doing. And to see faculty come through that journey with us over those years of building out programs that have delivered real change has been really exciting. And I would just be to say how grateful we have been for, universities, companies, governments that have really given us that chance to build out national platforms, amazing degree programs, some very, very cool MOOCs, desert technologies, and all the things that have been in between. A lot of gratitude. I'm very excited by the future, and like I say, I think it's a real chance now to focus in on the learner, to make money, and to make money for the learner, and not to be coy about that, and be proud of it.
Yeah, I love it. That's a great call to action and motivating, sentiment to wrap up the episode on. So just thank you so much for hanging out and sharing all that you did. We'll have ways to connect with you and Construct in the description of the episode. But it's good chatting with you.
Thanks ever so much.
The Hired Geek Podcast is a part of the Enrollify Podcast Network. If you like this podcast, chances you'll like all the other Enrollify shows too. Our podcast network is growing constantly, and we've got a plethora of marketing, enrollment, and higher technology shows that are jam-packed with stories, ideas, and frameworks all designed to empower you to be a better hired professional. Our shows help you find your next big idea and feature a selection of the industry's best as your host. Learn from people like Jamie Hunt, Seth Odell, Dave Kibbolds, and Eddie Francis, as well as so many other of your favorite leaders in higher education. Enrollify is made possible by the support of Element 451, the leading AI-powered, all-in-one student engagement platform helping institutions create meaningful, personalized, engaging interactions with students. Learn more at element451.com.